We are now live. I don't see any questions in the doc just yet. So for those of you joining, if you would like to verbalize and then ask your question or drop your question in the agenda. Christopher, would you like to verbalize your question?
Yeah. So just like general question is that I think a lot of people, they kind of imagine what life is like as a CEO, but I'm just curious as to some of the things that you learned and some of the big takeaways that you've got from your last couple of weeks.
So was that directed at me?
I think it was at the shadows.
Yeah, I think so too.
It was at the shadows. Sorry if that wasn't clear.
So should the current shadows go first, or Darren, do you want to go?
Go for it.
So you unmute. You go ahead.
Sure. I'm a past shadow. So one of the things that I wrote a blog post, by the way, so I won't repeat any of that, and we can link it here in the doc. But another thing that I didn't mention in there, but I saw another shadow bring up, is context switching. It is astonishing the amount of context switching you have to do as a chief of exec. From meeting to meeting, it could be completely different topics. Great news, not so great news, things that have to do with work, things that don't have to do with work. It is an amazing, amazing feat to switch context and keep the wheels on the bus, so to speak. All you, Shane.
Yeah, I think for me, just the demands on Sid's time. I think you go in understanding how busy he is, but looking at his schedule and realizing just the meetings that are required to keep this going, along with the items that Sid's interested in personally, and the opportunity to learn about those things, the investments and the passion projects. Those are things that are big time commitments, and I just understanding the level of coordination it takes to be able to make that happen. There's a lot of work that goes into that.
Thank you.
I could jump into and just where Shane and Darren are speaking to, I think the level of organization that goes behind that as well, separating not only what he's doing from a GitLab perspective as well as his own personal interests. It is crazy how he's able to be organized and like Darren says, context switch, and from that sense, it's very impressive.
Hey, this is Jim Riley. I think the async communication, you really, really appreciate that when you see going meeting to meeting to meeting and you see how much content is being covered very, very efficiently. So it just totally reinforced the need for that. I think, we see that with Amazon a lot and kind of their mantra and other organizations, but that was absolutely reinforced how much content we could get through in a short amount of time.
Okay, I see that I have the next question. I was wondering what some of the benefits are to participating in a CEO shadow program, all remote versus in person.
Great question. So I've documented the first answer here. So we have a new section, relatively new section in the CEO Shadow page that shadows have been adding tips and FYIs on shadowing remotely. My rotation was amongst the first that were remote. So that was still being built out pretty robustly. I love that I could still see my family as a remote shadow. I love that I could wake up and go to bed and hug my wife and kiddo. That part was awesome. But I definitely missed the energy of San Francisco, which for me is a new place that gives me an opportunity to travel 3,000 miles away and breathe different air and see different people and go to different coffee shops. There's just some native energy in that. So I missed it. I'm thankful for the opportunity for sure. I look forward to when we can do it in person again, and then maybe you can choose instead of it being chosen for you.
I'll vocalize my next comment. I participated in the program in January, and due to some physical factors, I would have had a really tough time participating in person. So this provided a more inclusive opportunity for me to actually participate in the program. So I think that's a benefit as well.
I'll go I've only done 1 week so far, but I think for me, being remote has been helpful in a processing sense. Anybody on the call for marketing that is on calls with me a lot knows that I'm very extroverted and talkative. And if I'm in person and I have another person to talk to that's got downtime, like we're going to spend that whole time talking, right? And I'm not going to spend as much time thinking about the meeting we just had and what I can take away from that, what I can take back to my personal development, to developing my team. And so I think, for me, it's just really helped to create space so that I can soak in all the things that I'm learning through the process.
Yeah, I'm adding some notes here. Brendan O'Leary, I think, was the last in-person shadow. And I talked with him ahead of time and asked him this before going in. And one of the points he raised is, it's awesome to be in San Francisco. It's awesome to be able to go on a Valley dinner. But a lot of the time he was there, he's in the kitchen in one room and Sid's over in his room. So he was quasi-remote, even though he was in person. So he said he didn't feel like he missed that much, or we would miss that much being remote versus in person.
I'll add one other thing, kind of going back to the original question. I don't know if I answered it directly. What are the benefits to participating remotely versus in person? So you get a 2-week rotation and you get a lot more quote unquote bang for your buck remote because Sid's schedule has less travel buffer. So because of that, you end up with a busier schedule. I don't know if that's long-term healthy for Sid, but as a shadow, it definitely gives you more opportunity to see and hear and experience more per minute that you're in the program versus in person.
So I've got a quick question I was trying to jot down here in the doc, or copy paste rather in the doc. So for the shadows, how has the experience helped you, or has it helped you in expanding your own networks, your personal networks, your professional networks, especially in terms of diversity, inclusion, and belonging? Where you're expanding your networks and you're not just, similar to me and same people in your network. Have you seen examples shadowing Sid, or have you taken anything away from the experience and how you might increase your own networks?
I can go for that. I was able to connect with some of the non-GitLab related meetings that happened. There were some that touched on some things that really resonated with me from a personal standpoint. Really incredible to see where Sid puts his money and where he puts his passion and his effort outside of GitLab. And some of those really happened to intersect for things that were a passion of mine. There was also a lot of meetings with external parties and some pretty amazing opportunities to make connections with people that don't necessarily work at GitLab. And not all of them, but every now and again, you'll find one that really resonates with you on a personal level. And it gives you this opportunity to reach out to these people and say, hey, remember me? We crossed paths for 20 minutes in the CEO Shadow program. I'd love to pick your brain on X, Y, or Z. You don't have those opportunities if you're not in the program. and you're exposed to so many of those meetings that have nothing to do with your day job. So from a diversity standpoint, certainly a diversity of industry and thought and perspective that you're able to see. And then more closely to GitLab, I feel like leaving the program, I had a better rapport with a lot of people that would have taken months to set up that many coffee chats. In a way, these are micro coffee chats, because even if you don't communicate with these people, you kind of see each other and there's some amount of rapport, and you've been in the same room together, and you get that opportunity with dozens, if not hundreds of people within the organization. So the next time that you see them or you have the opportunity to work with them, it's not starting completely fresh. There is that reference point that, hey, we were in the shadow program together, and that is a great icebreaker going forward.
Thanks for sharing, Darren.
I was in the program when there were some discussions around recruitment and recruiting for diversity, and how organizations often kind of think about the results and the metrics. And there was a lot of discussion around, if we can emphasize top of funnel going for diversity, we'll get the bottom of funnel. And there was work around the handbook in that regard. So it really helped me think about that process differently. Let's focus on the inputs, not the outcomes per se, because if we do a good job on the inputs, we're going to get better outcomes.
Lorna, I was just going to add that from my experience, it's similar to what Darren mentioned about meeting people, that even a brief introduction is really helpful in kind of breaking down those barriers where you wouldn't likely have that opportunity to meet someone one-on-one, or, in a 3-person group in any other setting, really, in your day job. So that was important to me, even joining or shadowing one-on-ones, to have those few minutes as the call is getting started where you're kind of having casual conversation, and you're just never going to get that in any other setting.
Awesome. Thank you, Betsy.
Hi, Nicholas here. Is there anything where you drastically changed your perspective or opinion about GitLab, or what GitLab is doing after completing the shadow program?
I would say for me, it was more reinforcing what GitLab is, and actually seeing the values being lived throughout the day, coming up in conversations throughout the day. And even when we would have some external meetings and we'd introduce ourselves as Shadow, and folks, oh, I've heard of the Shadow, that sounds really cool. So I can think of a lot of reinforcements. I can't think of any examples where it was there was a delta in what I expected.
So I had the next comment. The biggest takeaway for me, that was kind of the biggest delta before and after, was the realization and recognition that a lot of thought goes into every decision, especially those that will have outsized impact across the entire organization. My rotation was pretty early on in the pandemic. So there was a lot of discussion globally on what does this mean? What metrics need to change? What is changing under our feet? How can we best account for that? Coming out of the program, I feel it is much easier to assume positive intent once you've been in there. It's much easier now to look at any decisions that are made and reference back to the CEO Shadow program and reverse engineer in my head. Oh, I bet this, and this happened. And I bet these things were considered. And without that context, without ever seeing it lived out, it's kind of difficult to have that baseline. So if you're thinking of joining the program, look for that. Look for thoughts being created and processed, and see how the values intersect with those.
Thanks. That makes sense. Yeah.
Don't see any other questions at the moment. Does anyone have any more questions, or is anyone waiting for number 5? Since we're about halfway through, I'm going to go ahead and stop the live stream.